Hi everyone, welcome. The two bins that you see right here are a pair of red wiggler bins that I paired up recently. I've been managing a lot of my systems as pairs. I find it helpful to be able to have a point of reference in case I'm trying to troubleshoot something, or maybe even, replicate something that I'm seeing is working really well in a bin. So I like to have that sort of control, at least one other similar system, similar age, similar management method. The only thing with those two last check-in was that I got them mixed up. So while I was working on bin A, I thought I was really in bin B, and I was talking about things and things weren't adding up, and besides that there was a whole bunch of other screw-ups. So I ended up just playing that video back like in double speed and doing a little bit of voiceover dialogue. Today I'm going to see if I can try to remain focused, make sure I'm aware of which bin I'm working on while I'm working on it, and try to minimize, or even if possible reduce or eliminate screw-ups today. Well, I guess we'll just have to see how that goes. I'm gonna put on a glove and we're gonna get to work. So now the bin here on the bench is the one that's got the sticker on the side that says January, and I just looked over my shoulder to make sure. The other one is the one that says February, so this is the older of the two systems. So, like I do sometimes, I've got a little bit of information about the systems here for us to look at really quick. So, this being the January bin, the older one, that's the one that's 248 days old today. That's over 35 weeks of age. The other system, just a little bit over 30 weeks of age. And it's the other system where we've got cotton in there. So we'll get to that one momentarily. For this system here, it's now receiving its 20th feeding. No, that's not true. This will be 21. It was at the last feeding that we gave it its 20th feeding. And that was 10 days ago. They got a bunch of pumpkin, and well, it just so happens that I've got even more for them today. Kind of a repeat, almost like a redo of last time. See if I could do so this time with minimal mistakes. Now, I mentioned a moment ago how certain bins are being paired up and managed together. And that just means they share the same feeding date, so they're, tended to on the same day. And they're fed the same stuff, or similar, and in similar quantities. But you might have noticed that one key difference already was the other one had a plastic covering. Here we covered only with paper, well, cardboard, which allows for a little bit more airflow. So we must have in a recent check-in observed in the other bin that some sort of help was needed for the bin to preserve its moisture and not lose it too rapidly. And if we find that here too, moisture is being lost at too rapid a rate, we can certainly consider covering with plastic here too, or somehow compensating. A little seedling growing here. I don't mind. All I got to do is uproot it, and then it becomes more worm food. So that coffee filter that I just removed that was resting here was showing that we had last fed on this side. And up until the last feeding, we were alternating feeding sides, going back and forth, flip-flopping one side to the other. That's how this bin originally earned its little nickname of the ping pong bin, which is kind of an obsolete nickname anymore. But it's pretty clear that that's what that means, is that the feeding zone gets ping pong switched every time from one side to the other. But last week we decided that these systems are getting pretty mature, and that we might try something that we've tried recently in a few other systems, was to start establishing more of a wedge setup. And I guess wedge setup is just sort of a little bit of a nickname for, the arrangement of stuff in the system. So you can imagine a system this old, almost 250 days of age, it's almost all castings, We'll probably find little scraps of uneaten bits of bedding and food or whatever, but for the most part we got castings here. So the idea was that we're going to commit this side to being where all those nice beautiful castings keep getting nudged over to, and the opposite side is where we're going to feed from now on. And then, I guess that's how you sort of come up with that concept of a wedge, right? Because, here's the wedge. And here you've got very little food, and here you got a lot of food and bedding, So you taper off the amount of residue, food and bedding and whatnot within the system as you make your way this way. Or maybe the other way to think about it is that the wedge is bigger on this side. Meaning you've got minimum amount of castings on this side, and as you work your way over, you end up with a greater amount or higher concentration or higher percentage of castings on that side. So the wedge is just meant to show that across this distance there is a variability in the amount of stuff relative to itself, if that makes any sense. So far we've been talking a lot, and I think we've only observed one worm, one little guy that was out here on the surface to greet us. I'm assuming that the rest of them are probably down in the feeding area, enjoying pumpkin, but you know, after 10 days since the last feeding, it seems unlikely that any pumpkin would remain. Well, it's a good thing that we got a little bit extra to replenish with. Let's see. Now, I know corn was not part of the last feeding, so this is a leftover. I like to check out the leftovers because they take time to break down, and it's interesting to see how they progress in the breakdown process over time. You can really see the worms pretty densely packed within this nice amount of bedding that we gave them last time, especially down low where all the juices have collected. Look at all those worms. I seriously doubt that we're going to bump into any leftover pumpkin. But we're definitely seeing a good amount of leftover bedding, right? Although they're doing a number on that too, you must admit. Things look pretty good. So I guess the whole concept of this wedge management is that we just, you know, nudge the wedge. Nudge stuff over in this general direction. Hey, here's the cork. Cork is one of these unusual little test objects we've been monitoring the progress of over many years. That thing's been in so many different bins, moving from bin to bin over its slow but steady decomposition process. So I'm wondering if there's any other leftovers besides those corn cobs and that cork. I thought there was one other novelty item floating around. Here we go. Found it. So this is actually the stem of a fairly large pumpkin that I used last year to feed my worms. It's so cool to watch how this thing gradually reduces in size. It almost seems like there's probably a little hole down there in the middle, because what I'm seeing down there I think is a couple worms. Look at that little guy. Somehow they've managed to create a little tiny cubby hole within here. I feel so tempted to just chip away at it. You saw my thumb kind of picking at it. I have to hold myself back because I don't want to, you know, help the stuff break down. I'd rather just observe how it breaks down at its own natural pace with the worms working it. So we're just going to leave it be. But I mean, it's late September now, so we're, you know, about a month and a half away from Halloween. That means we're going to see pumpkins in front of every household. And then soon after the holiday passes, we worm farmers are going to have all kinds of yummy worm food at our disposal when our friends look to get rid of their jack-o'-lanterns. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. So I've got to really do away with my little secret stash of pumpkin. So this will be a good contributing effort towards that goal. Here we have the stem of a banana. Oddly enough, holding together quite nicely. It feels quite firm. This is not just the stem of the banana. This is that big chunk of wood or whatever it is at that point that all the bananas in that bunch hang off of. So that's a little bit tougher material. I could see why that might take a little longer for the worms to break down. So you may have noticed this, just the general shape of this whole system is kind of in different layers. So over here we've clearly got what's almost completely broken down in finished castings. And as I start nudging things over, you start observing a little bit of residue within the material, a little bit of leftover bedding from previous feedings, maybe even a little bit of food scrap in here. But we got to make room for the next feeding, so we're just going to nudge this whole shebang over, and this is our little peek at seeing how many worms are hanging out here in this stuff. It does seem like we got quite a few. You know what? Let me go grab my bedding so we can reset over here, but this is a fun little watch. Let's let these little guys settle down for a moment, and I'll be right back. I wasn't quite sure what to expect in here, since the other system obviously needed a little bit of help holding on to its moisture. We gave it plastic coverings. I wasn't sure if we'd need the same here, but my initial reaction to what I've seen so far is that everything's just fine from a moisture perspective. I know that that last batch of bedding that we added in here was pretty damp. I remember calling that out in a few of my videos. And luckily it's not gone dry. Sometimes you go down into your system and you start observing that the bedding materials that you've been using are a little bit drier, at least in little patches of dry stuff, where the worms really can't go-to, you know. They can't really do their work in dry material. They're just going to steer clear of anything like that and seek out nice, damp, cozy accommodations for themselves. This batch that I've got here is just sort of a mixture of the previous batch, which was pretty much paper only, I believe, and at this point I took cardboard only and blended it in. So this is a blend of previously prepared paper only with some recently added cardboard, giving it a better combo, I think, of materials for them to enjoy. So let's just start rebuilding this feeding area with this nice abundant batch of bedding we just gave them. A lot of these older objects we can place in here first. And I've got my worm chow, so I'm going to include a little bit of this here and there, along with the regular foods. And this thing's kind of in a big chunk, but I did take it out of the freezer a little while ago, so my hope is that I can chip off a fair bit to give to these little guys, but do so in a way that I leave an equal amount for the other system. It doesn't matter so much. I think you can look at this from the perspective of, hey, yeah, they're getting a whole bunch of yummy pumpkin, but as soon as the moisture in that stuff starts to drip out and they nibble away what remains, there's not going to be a whole lot left, and then the stuff they're really going to be nibbling on is the bedding itself. So now I've got a little bit more stuff that we can drizzle across the top of this feeding area, but I think we could begin covering up here. Nice, very nice system, you got to admit. There's lots of worms in here. You know, I've got this urge to somehow build out all my systems with more and more material, just a greater amount of volume that the worms can explore and live in. So I think just providing them with extra space gives a boost to the population, because they'll strive to fill that available space once they sense that it's at their disposal. So it's been making me wonder if I should be running my bins right from the get-go with a much greater quantity of bedding. But I think there are sort of ideal, proper ratios. Sometimes you hear about, you know, X number of worms to X gallons or whatever amounts of bedding to place them into. So I'm sure there's a potential of going a little bit too extreme on that proportion, but you know, oops, there we go. Got to be careful not to take a little wormy with you. But yeah, okay, so, you know, some people might even run their systems as a wedge like this right from the start. You know, they might load the whole thing up with a bunch of bedding and then just really focus on feeding and replenishing on one side, always nudging the finished material off to the side. So here we go, putting the feeding zone right back where we found it, because at this point we're just going to keep feeding on that side. And at some point, you have to expect that the material on this edge is going to eventually just be depleted of all the things that the worms want or need, any food or bedding scraps. And then another thing we might even do on that edge is somehow maybe leave it exposed to the air so it has an even greater chance at drying. For now, I'm not going to be trying to push that too quickly, because then we would really be focusing on migrating the worms. I'm still not ready to do that here. I'd really like to just run it as a wedge pattern for a little while, and then we'll eventually figure out, you know, what to do with these worms, get them into some new space. But for now, that's it for this bin. Let's go get the other one. Okay, so now this is that system. That's the slightly younger one that's got the cotton in there. And I think that the, yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it, but yeah, there was this little number in here showing how many days that the cotton's been in progress. I'm looking for some feedback on the cotton, you know, because some people that have composted fabrics know already what to expect from socks. So I know that there's certain bits of that material that's just not going to get broken down whatsoever due to the fact that it's elastic and it's probably not a natural material. So I just want to know when I got to call it quits and say, well, this ain't going to break down any further. So we'll get to the point where we find the socks. I found that the upper portion of the sock that goes around your calf still has that ring around the top cuff. That seems to be the most heavily concentrated with the elastic material. And the lower portions of that top calf covering portion of the sock are mostly gone at this point. So, oh, and then there's the other part of it, because I'd cut each sock in half, and then the part that's, you know, down on your foot actually, that whole thing seems to be holding together as like a single piece. And I don't know if that's just because maybe there's a high concentration of elastic material, more than I thought, down in there. It's like, as you can see, you can clearly tell that this is still, you know, a little hollow piece of fabric with the inside and an outside. And, you know, if I'm not careful, I'll easily tear through it, because it is becoming extremely, what's the word, threadbare? And it's fragile, so I don't want to, you know, manhandle it, again, in the same spirit of wanting to just observe how the worms do with stuff versus helping things break down. Other people have different points of view. It depends on how you look at it. A lot of people just see it as, hey, you put stuff in the worm bin to be broken down, why not help reach that goal? I guess because we're making videos and we're curious and we're experimenting, so I don't always treat, you know, fast casting development as my chief priority. I like learning from some of these experiences and experimenting and stuff like that. So, you know, besides the test bedding objects made out of cotton, these chunks of socks, we obviously gave them supplemental bedding last time, so that's what you're seeing mixed in here too, is more and more of that prepared scraps of shredded paper, my prepared bedding. So now here, each one of these has sort of like a little appendage hanging off of it, which is the remainder of the elastic material on the lower portion that surrounds your calf. But for the most part, it's been whittled away, and I've not seen a whole lot of change in these. It just seems like they're kind of at this point and they're holding there, making me wonder if all the cotton in these has already been depleted by chance. Maybe the same thing here. So, I don't know. I've seen people run fabrics in their systems and then eventually pull stuff out when it's gotten to the point where it'll, you know, no further break down. If I'm at that point, then this experiment is over, but I'm not going to pull it out prematurely. I do want to hear from people as far as what they've seen. So we'll definitely restore the cotton items back to the feeding area, and then we could continue to watch its breakdown, assuming it's going to continue to break down. So I'm going to excavate the feeding area, but once again, we're going to get a good view of the worms here. So as I like to do sometimes, I'm going to probably let the video run for a few moments just so we can sit back and watch them squirm for a minute or two, and then before you know it, they're all going to be out of view and gone. It's always fun to see how many worms are in a system like this, because there are lots of them. All right, let's let these little guys relax for a moment, then we'll get them fed. I always enjoy those little short clips where we get to watch the worms that we just unearthed burrow down into the material. I think doing that, besides kind of being an interesting little spectacle for us to gawk at here on the video, I like to use it also as a measure for two things. Number one is, hey, how lively and motivated. Lively. I think lively is the right word for the worms, right? You know, because if they're lively, that means they're healthy, they're moving around, they're mobile. You know, how healthy are my worms? Are they able to react quickly to the light and burrow out of view? And they do seem to do that pretty quickly. And I guess the other variable for that being possible in the first place is the material itself. If the material's all clumpy and, you know, has no, you know, little avenues for the worms to burrow down into, it's just a hunk of stuff, then that could certainly impede the worm's ability to burrow into it, elongating the amount of time it requires for them to retreat out of the light. So I'm always glad to see when the worms are able to just burrow right into the nice loose material, and they do so quickly because they're all lively and energetic. So to me, it's kind of a measure of how things look from a couple different perspectives, from the worm health perspective, I guess, and from the material quality or consistency perspective. So let's see, we've got some leftovers here. Yeah, I'm just curious, is that it? Is that all I can expect from socks? Is that, you know, that cuff that goes around the upper calf, you know, going to break down any further? Or is this the point at which it would normally just get, you know, pulled out and treated as fully composted? Definitely looking forward to hearing some feedback on that. So I guess in an interest of keeping the castings only edge of the wedge clean, maybe it would make good sense to be a little bit more careful not to send too much debris over in that direction. But like I said, we're not looking to harvest these castings right away. There's certainly time for that. So for now, this is just the early stages of running the system as a wedge pattern. So we'll do so for a while, I believe. But you know, at some point we will have to just decide that it's time to move the worms on to greener pastures and grab the castings that they created here. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, they get a little bonus piece of extra bedding here, this soiled paper towel that I used as transport medium. Not that I really had to, it was all frozen together in a big lump. But I just figured this way, if a little piece tries to flake off, it's not going to end up on the ground. Keep checking my glove now, because it's weird, you know, you find a little tiny worm on there, it's almost impossible to tell that they're even there. I mean, you're not going to feel them moving around. You got to definitely observe them visually. You're not going to sense them. Unlike earlier, though, when I first reached into the bin and I just kind of held that first wad of worms, it was so cool because I did allow for a little bit of time and get these little tickling sensations around your around your fingers when they're squirming there. A lot of times, you know, you don't leave enough time to feel the worms moving around in your hands. A lot of times you're just kind of brushing up against them, moving stuff around. But if you actually try to hold some of them for a while, they're going to try to get out of your hand. And then that squirming is just interesting, like a little tickling of your fingers. So I can't think of anything else. You know, I did skip putting grit in today, but I would assume that system's this old, 30 plus weeks in both cases, already has a lot of grit present in it. And since I use pulverized eggshell, I think that that's what we're always seeing, all these little white specks. I have a feeling if I was using some other sort of grit, perhaps rock dust or something that's not so bright white and easily visible, the castings in general wouldn't look so speckled with little white stuff. But I'm pretty certain that all that white stuff that we're observing in my castings is pretty much all grit that the worms can make use of if they want to. So I think we're done here. I don't even know, do we need to go back with the plastic covering? I guess just for consistency's sake, we'll stick with it for one more go around. But I think at some point soon we could do away with it and maybe switch over to some form of paper or cardboard covering to allow for just a little bit better airflow in here. But things do look really nice. I definitely like the way the whole top surface of the bin looks when you open up a system that's got plastic coverings, because the recirculating moisture under the plastic makes the entire top surface fair game for the worms versus becoming kind of a dry no man's land. And that's one of the main reasons I like plastic coverings. But on the flip side, I also like the ventilation that you get by using something more capable of allowing air to go through it and stuff like that. So I think we're done here. I've got a few things I've got to put away and clean up, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. That stuff's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.